And I'm not sure if we are. Oh, here we are. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas y bienvenides to LatinoLEAD's second annual Afro-Latinidad series, Our History, Our Story, and Our People, which is part of our Elevate, Inspire LatinoLEAD series. My name is Irma Marquez Trapero. I am the executive director of LatinoLEAD, which is a nonprofit organization here in Minnesota that focuses on creating social impact through collaboration, power building, and leadership development. We are joined today by Camila Mercado Micheli, who is part of our network engagement and event planning committee member. Who will be facilitating the Q&A after the presentation. But without further ado, I am honored and very, very excited and humbled to be here with Yvette Modestin, a nationally renowned writer, poet, and activist who is joining our interactive conversation today about the African identity, Blackness, and anti-Blackness within our Latinx Latino community. So thank you, Yvette, so much for joining us, and I'll let you take it over from here.
Okay. O mi marero, ayala o mi marero, o mi marero, ayala o mi marero. Giving thanks to those whose shoulders we stand on. I pour libation for this gathering, that we come forth with good intentions, with receiving truth, with dismissing lies, with unmasking our beauty and our identity. May we center Blackness. Well, may we love Blackness. May we celebrate Blackness in the midst of the diversity that we carry as people from Latin America and the Caribbean. Saludos, buenas tardes. Un placer estar aquí con ustedes. First and foremost, the one thing you definitely need to know about me is that I am born and raised in Colón, Panama. When you understand what Colón is, or as I call it, the Africa in Panama, then you understand why my identity is deeply rooted in the celebration of my African identity. I hope today is an opportunity for us to begin a conversation, because this is an ongoing conversation. So I don't know if we're going to start with the video or if we can pull up the PowerPoint and we can start from there.
Giving thanks to the ancestors who continue to guide me on this journey. Mangú, mofongo, el tambor, la salsa, el bembé, el reggaetón. Héctor Lavoe y Willy Colón cantaron. Lo bailan en Venezuela, lo bailan en Panamá, ese ritmo es africano y donde quiera va a acabar. Che, che, cole. That is Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean. The transatlantic slave trade is our story. It is our history. We were dropped off everywhere. We are 150 million plus just in our region. Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Santo Domingo are the most populated places of African warriors who continue to speak their truth and fight for their freedom. It is time to embrace it. It is time to see ourselves in Black Lives Matter. Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland could be Latinos. Let us not get caught up with what the name is supposed to sound like. If you know the colonial history of the region, you would see that truth. I see a room full of African descendants. I see a room of Afro-Latinos. I see a room of Afro-descendientes in all shades who speak Spanish, the imposed.
Thank you for that. So we wanted to start with that to ground ourselves um, in this conversation. And, whenever we go into this conversation, those of us in our community think that by centering Blackness means we are denying the other parts of ourselves. I am too mixed with Indigenous, I am too mixed with European, but my Blackness has defined the experience. And it's that Blackness that we continue to ignore. We're very quick to say somos taínos, somos indígenas, but we don't know what it means to say somos africanos, somos afrodescendientes. So today is an opportunity to really go through that conversation. So if we can go to the PowerPoint and then we'll start. So African identity in Latin America and the Caribbean is at the core of this conversation. Next. This is what Africa in the Americas look like. Puerto Rico, Cape Verde, Damani, myself, Panama, Baba Chucho, Venezuela, and our sister is from Honduras. Next. Today is about raising the voices of our ancestors. I truly believe I am an extension of those whose shoulders I stand on. I am the vibration of a truth that they continue to guide me to share with all of you. So today is about reclaiming the African identity, the Blackness in the Latino community. It's about restoring the damage that has been done and repairing it also by a process of our own internal and external healing. Next. It starts at all ages. This was one of my favorite presentations, and these young people, Frederick Douglass says it's easier to change the mind of a child than it is to change the mind of an adult. And I think the conversation needs to start sooner than later, because we're living in a world where race is clearly defined in this country. And we have fallen for a lie, as James Baldwin wrote about. This dehumanizing of Blackness is a world concept that even Latin America has perpetrated and has participated in. So we need to start having these conversations for these kids, that however light we showed out, however dark we showed up, the issue is, what are your roots? What is your story? One of the things that is very much in conversation right now is the movie In the Heights. I love the movie. I think the entire movie was a movie of Afro-Latinos. The conversation changes when Blackness, pigmentation, color is not that represented. And because there's such a deep denial of that story, of that history, that's why many of us have spoken up to say the colorism is real, because once again, we missed an opportunity to show all shades of who we are and not lie in this whiteness, in this white supremacy, white privilege that I think the Latino community also presents. Next. These are women of African descent of the diaspora, of the network of Afro-Latin American women, Afro-Caribbean women in the diaspora. And in this group, you will find Vice President of Costa Rica, Epsi Campbell, first Black female senator of Puerto Rico, Ana Rivera Lacen, first prominent leader from Santo Domingo, Sergio Galvan, one of the leading voices of Brazil, Valdecid Nascimento. So this is what we are. This is what we look like. Next. Why is this conversation important? Understanding race relations is important for all of us, even for those who feel that we are not impacted by that, but it's still important to own the conversation. Afro-Latinos, what does it mean? You know, that word was created and pushed forward. Some of the primary names in the opening, at least folks that have led me that I sat with, Marta Moreno Vega, Miriam Jimenez, may she rest in light and peace, and Juan Flores, may he rest in light and peace. My mentor, Dr. Prophet James Jennings. So what does that word was created to say? Yes, we're Latinos, but we are of African descent. We are Black. Because what was interesting was to come to this country as a college student from Panama and stand before someone who was sometimes even darker than me. And I would be like so excited, be like, estoy hablando en español. And the person would be like, pero yo pensaba que tú eras negra. I was like, what just happened? Yo todavía soy negra. Like, the word was created because there were so many people walking around saying, I'm not Black, I'm Dominican, I'm not Black, I'm Puerto Rican. I would invite everyone to go back and look at the full video. You can find it on YouTube, because Latino is not a race. Puerto Rican is not a race. Dominican is not a race. Panamanian is not a race. The conversation needs to be race-based, race-centered. And we also need to talk about the self-inflicted hate. The anti-Blackness that exists is not just a white to Black, it's a Black and Black. It's a Black and brown. We have been taught, don't say you're Black, and if we can pass a little, we gonna pass. But the bottom line is, you may be able to say you're white in this setting. When I do trainings and I say walk across the room if you're of African descent, and the lighter Latinos don't move. And they say, because, like, how do you identify yourself? They say white, but when you leave the Latino space, then what are you? So that's how deeply rooted the hate can go, and how you perpetrate that whiteness and that anti-Blackness even amongst ourselves. And this conversation is important because we continue to think that we are outside of the African American community. And for Afro-Latinos, Black Latinos like myself, we have African American Black experiences. No one knows I am Panamanian until I open my mouth and I speak in Spanish. And even then, as a Black Latina born and raised in Latin America, with Spanish como mi primer idioma, I still have to go through a checklist. Are you sure you're Panamanian? Sí, nací en Colón. Are you sure you're Panamanian? Sí, hablo español. Are you sure you're Panamanian? Sí, yo sé cómo se cocina arroz con pollo. I mean, like, literally, I have to go through a checklist because I am not easily seen as a Latina, because in this country, we've only shown this one version that does not look like me. Even though, as the video shared, we are 200 million plus in our region. Remember, there were more African enslaved people dropped off in Latin America and the Caribbean than there were in the US. So when we have this conversation about we are so mixed and whatever, it's like, what are you talking about? The Maroonage movement in Panama, the Cimarrones, los Palenques de Panama. At one point in Panama, it was 5-1. What does that mean? 5 Africans to 1 European. So anyone that thinks that Latin America was not built off the struggle of indigenous and Africans, yeah, you're not telling your truth, and you're not telling the truth of history. Today is just the beginning of this conversation. but it also requires you to go back like that symbol in the beginning was the Sankofa symbol for go back and fetch it. I ask all of you that are joining me here today, go back and fetch your story. Ask that question. ¿Y tu abuela dónde está? ¿Cómo se ve mi abuela? ¿De dónde venimos? When we do in my leadership training with young people, when we do the part of the tree and we ask the kids to go back and ask their family of the family tree, it is the longest activity in our curriculum because families don't want to answer the questions or don't have the answers and are unwilling to face the question. But as if you're parents, you need to know the struggle of your kids. You need to understand what they are experiencing when they're out in these streets. My young boys live schizophrenic lives because at home they're told, tú no eres negro, esa gente negra. But then when they walk out the house, they are black boys who are being followed and profiled like everyone else. Next. These are some of my young girls of the Leadership Project. Next. My young boys of the Leadership Project. So see, we all come in all shades and sizes. Next. One of the things that I'm hoping we recognize today is to be humble. The humility is important for this conversation. And the discomfort is real. If folks are not uncomfortable, then I worry because that means that you're not ready for change. Because the discomfort leads you to face things, to understand things, to listen to things differently that hopefully moves you through that discomfort to land in unmasking a lie and a truth that you've been doing. How do we show up to spaces? We need to figure out, how do we show up for each other? How do we see each other? Can we really see each other? And the dominant paradigm that has not facilitated an African descendant dialogue. I'm not saying here today everybody black. I'm saying here today most of us are of African descent from the lightest to the darkest. That's the roots. And then if you are color black, pigmentation black, then that also brings another experience. So that is what I think we need to change the paradigm, change the narrative that excludes blackness and denies blackness in the context of Latin America. Next. Our challenges and our goals for today. And for this ongoing conversation, but as Irma and Camila, we've been talking about, what do we need to do next? Is changing a cultural change. Be ready to do the work. And racial consciousness is an important part of learning. And where do you place yourself in history? And we need to explore our African identity. So those are some of the challenges and the goals of today. Next. Raising our voices. How many of us can say, I dare to be African? Dare to be African. Dare to be black. Dare to be your queen. Dare to extend your crown. For many of us, not seeking acceptance from a Eurocentric perspective. Yes, we are diverse, as I've said, Indigenous, African, and European. But what leads your experience? Is it your race? Is it your culture? And then when it's your culture that leads the experience, how many of that experience and that moment is deeply rooted in race? So how many times have I gone into stores and I'm like all happy? I get to buy my, all my stuff from my arroz con pollo, my habichuelas, and I get to the counter and I'm thinking I'm in a culturally safe space. And the person looks at me and does not speak to me back in Spanish. And literally it takes for me to ask, why are you not answering me back in Spanish? And then that way, in that moment, that experience is not a cultural experience for me. That becomes a racial experience. It got to the point that I was raised, I love when my family said, hola negrita. Me encanta. But when I came here, I would literally be in spaces and Latinos did not know that I was and that I spoke Spanish, sometimes better than the ones that challenged me. And they would be like, y esa negra, and I'll be like, y esa negra entiende todo lo que están diciendo. But it was interesting to then have another ear to that word that I love, negra, because it was when it's said with that anti-blackness, with that internal racism, with that internal hate, it's one step away from someone calling me the N-word in English, but they just say it in Spanish. So I think those are some of the realities that we need to face and live with. Next. Next. Identity. You know, one of the key questions that I want all of you to write down and take with you and sit with it is, how do you identify yourself? Answer that question honestly, with no barriers, with no mask. And then the next question is, and how do you think others identify you? Because you need to know both. I had to know that even though I was educated, even though I came from Central America and this perception of Central America is this low, I came from two educated parents, parents with positions, in a community that was very righteous and self-determined. I wasn't allowed to speak on any of that because the false identity is that black means bad and black means poor. And there's nothing wrong. That's our part of our community, but there was no room to say anything else. So all my experiences were not allowing me to be in my full identity. So you need to understand that when I walked into spaces and I'm like, I can handle this, I'm educated, I got the language, I got the education, and then people just totally like, oh no, she's black, she doesn't know anything. People will try to speak for me, answer my questions, or not even engage with me. So, what does black and brown mean to you? And why don't we say black and black? You know, I have this thing about when we say black and black, but if you really understand what the Latino community is, it can be black and black. Like my organization, Encuentro Diaspora Afro, is a black and black conversation because we come in through the lens of blackness, not this lens of brown that speaks to our diversity but dilutes our blackness. And there's nothing diluting about me being black and proud. Making the connection. And how do we make that connection with each other, with our story, with our truth, and with our history? And systemic racism, systemic oppression, how they interplay in our relationships with each other. You know, we are told, many of us are told when we come to this country, African Americans are this, and we fall for it. But the bottom line is, none of us from Latin America and the Caribbean, if you're an immigrant, all of us are walking the streets of whatever part of the country we are in. Today, most of you in Minnesota are walking these streets of Minnesota because of African American folks. So to dismiss that or to think that Latino identity supersedes the struggle of African Americans who shaped this land, yes, you know, they were the core of it. Then we need to start really paying attention to how systemic racism has taught us, to see our history differently. Next. So racism and discrimination in Latin America are real. The sense of entitlement on the part of lighter skinned like people is equally matched by a sense of underprivilege and rejection felt by the darker groups. Next. Development. Identity formation and clarity is key to our development as a strong and vibrant community. We need to have a different context, and we need to take on personal responsibility of taking on the development of that inclusion. Ask yourself today, what is getting in the way? What is getting in the way for you to engage in this conversation? What is getting in the way of you to saying I'm an African descendant? What is getting in the way of you to say I am of African descent? I am Black. How many of us, even with our darker skin, can walk into a space and say, I'm Black, and that's enough? Because I'm Black in Panama, I'm Black in the US, I'm Black in Puerto Rico, I'm Black in Brazil. I just happen to speak a language that our colonizers imposed on us because none of us are speaking our original language. So, what is getting in the way of us going deeper into the conversation? Next. Education. It is critical of what we have been teaching. What is the historical truth? Realities in our countries. Example, Dominican Republic. When I work with Dominican kids, they've been told that their abusers were the Haitians, and not that Española was one island, and that the Haitians helped them in against the colonizers. So in Dominican Republic they teach us a history of the Haitians being their abusers, and this, which speaks to the anti-blackness of that historical. And remember, they were one. They were one. And when you walk around this space, it's just one road that separates them. Beauty standards, our hair. How many of us have heard, pelo bueno, pelo malo? So it's like, no, we need to not get caught up with that. Mi pelo es bueno. I always say, when people try to say mi pelo es malo, I'm like, no, mi pelo es bueno. You just need to buy a better comb and a better brush. But, we need to not fall into all those stereotypes. And this better Black, I've been in spaces where when people found out that I was from Panama, it's like, oh, you're not one of them. One of who? I am one of them. I am Black in the world. So I'm not separate from an African American or any other Black person walking in these streets. Next. I want to move through these real quick so we can have time for a Q&A. Terms: African descendants or people of African descent. Diaspora is anywhere outside of the continent where people of African descent are. We define racism as the power and control. People of color, Black people, Latino people, we can be discriminating, we can be racist, but the power and control, who has it? Supremacy complex. I do think that the white supremacy conversation is a conversation within the Latino community, and this term Latinidad and Hispanic that seeps in whiteness, that does not allow for Blackness to come in. Next. And I spoke of these two questions. How do you identify yourself, and how do you think people identify you? Next. Next. I want to get to the breakdown. Next. 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 So as I share, there's an estimated 150 million people of African descent in Latin America and the Caribbean, representing about 1/3 of the entire regional population. Afro-Latinos, or people of African descent, exist in all countries of the region in groupings that range from less than 1% to as high as 30% in the country like Colombia, and 46% in Brazil. And those numbers have changed in the last year. Next. So this is the breakdown: 11, Trinidad and Tobago; number 10, Cuba; number 9, United Kingdom; number 8, Venezuela. Next. Number 7, Jamaica; number 6, France; number 5, Santo Domingo; number 4, Haiti. And folks are always very surprised at those numbers, but that's the real, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Española, was the largest pocket of people of African descent in the Caribbean. So that's why those numbers are, when I hear Dominicans and Haitians speak as if though they're so extreme from each other, I'm like, no, you're only a road, and your numbers are very close to each other. Next. Then you have Colombia, United States and Brazil, and Ecuador is actually in there now too as one of the larger communities because they're getting a lot of Venezuelans and a lot of Colombians that are going to Ecuador. Next. This is for the mental health, which is really important. Latino youth are now suffering from depression and schizophrenia, which results from living as disempowered people of color within inevitably of white supremacy. My young boys and girls come to group saying that they're told to not have black friends, to not have black girlfriends or boyfriends, porque tienen que superar la raza, and that no one's gonna think they're get their like them if they go black. Next. Being considered at least three minorities in one, Black, Latina, and female, is a tremendous psychological burden on many of us. Next. White Latin Americans and mestizos must also reflect on their own negative and dysfunctional racial attitudes. Next. Self-esteem and positive self-images are critical to our group solidarity, and without solidarity, development is impossible. Next. I'm going to try to finish up so we can go into Q&A. People of African descent have much to gain by working together, but to do so effectively, they must understand the underlying conversations that is meant to hinder exchange among themselves as people of African diaspora in the Americas. Next. Women from Uruguay. Next. These are some of the original African names in Panama. Next. Women from Honduras. Next. Racism and discrimination bring about severe stresses. Even if an individual's African origin is obvious to others, some people of African descent exhibit fear or embarrassment in publicly associating their racial lineage with Africa. And let me read that last part. Fear or embarrassment. I literally have stood before some of us who are absolutely afraid to say I'm Black and really feel like by saying it, they are going to lose something versus gaining a truth and a history and an identity that speaks true to who you are. Next. Next. Nicaragua. Next. Colombia, they have a law that protects their land, and I don't know if many of you have seen that there's been killings of over 1,000 Afro-Colombians have been killed. Afro-Colombians and indigenous Colombians have been killed since the peace agreement. So that and most of the fight of Afro-Colombians is around the territory, and the law 7093 gives them these lands, ancestral lands. Next. In Panama, my mentor, Clarel Richards, was able to pass Civic National Day for Black Race in Panama. The day is celebrated on May 30th. So we have Mes de la Etnia Negra. We started with one day and we now make it an entire month. Next. Panama, that's my father. Next. Haitian and Dominican Republic relations, there's a long history of anti-sentiment, long track record of internal racism or self-hatred in the Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic is the only country in Latin America that does not celebrate the fall of Spanish colonialism or victory over it, to not recognize or celebrate the loss of Spanish sovereignty in the Americas. However, they celebrate Haiti's retreat from the Dominican Republic in 1844. Next. Santo Domingo. Next. Puerto Rico, for some, identified directly with one's African heritage, carries a self-conscious shame or feelings of inadequacy. The only exception is within an exotic context. You know, we celebrate our music, we celebrate our sports, but we don't celebrate our roots. Next. Let's move more. I don't know. Is this a good place to start, Camila? Or do we want a couple more minutes on the PowerPoint?
I think 5 more minutes on the PowerPoint would be great.
Okay.
I know there's a lot of great information that we would like our audience to have access to. So yeah, we're good in
Okay.
time.
Fine. Okay. Next. Self injected hate. Latino immigrants would now rather suffer the indignity of discrimination than connect their mistreatment in the US to being seen as people of color. Next. Language can be very destructive psychologically, emotionally, and community based. Next. These are all the Spanish language classification of race. We've also heard Afro-Latino, pelo bueno, el negro decente, mi prieta, mulata, mejorar la raza, moreno, indio, indígena, salvaje. Next. We say molleta, which for me is means ugly, but for some of folks they would be like, what? And I'm like, that's not a word that lands well on me. Hava, light-skinned woman who has features that indicate black ancestry. Grifa, female with white features who is frizzled or kinky hair. Trigueña, female who's olive skin. And Prieta, a black female. When I came to this country and I would hear Dominicans and Puerto Ricans, specifically in Boston, where I'm at, is more Caribbean. And I heard that we're Prieta. I was like, ¿qué significa eso? Eso no es ni una palabra, because Prieta in Panama means tight. So I didn't understand how they went from tight to black. How did Prieta become the term for black women? Next. Summary. To summarize, Afro-Latin Americans and African Americans would readily find fertile common ground on mutual understanding because the cultural and racial origins of North American Blacks and Afro-Latin Americans are in Africa, mostly West Africa or Southwest Africa. Both groups were brought to the Americas for the same reason and under the same conditions. Next. Differences in geography, language, and time are external accidents imposed by the process of enslavement and colonialism. These factors still impact our communities today. Next. What does solidarity look like for people of African descent? Which is a question that I think we could walk away with today. And I know we have a second part next week that folks can come back with. What did they reflect? What came to them after today? Next. Empowerment would look like acceptance of who you are, acceptance of those of us who move with our blackness, nurture leadership. Who are the people that should be leading this conversation? Who are the faces that should be leading this conversation? And to be consistent. One of the things about the conversation with Lin Manuel Miranda, is that he's been consistent in representation, but he really missed the boat in the Heights. Um, because it has to be a consistent conversation. You can't do it one way, bring it up one day and then forget about it the next day. It requires a level of discipline, I think, to be able to stand in that truth. Next. To redefine their place in society, Afro-Latin Americans need to challenge the conditions that keep them oppressed and establish alliances with other groups across the geography for a collective agenda and common solutions. Next. 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 The potential, yeah, go back. Yeah, the potential of 150 million Afro descendants who discover the power of their ancestry in a global context will generate significant new wealth for the region and the rest of the planet in this new millennium. Next. 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 I think that should be it. And I hope this was just the beginning, as we shared. So I hope this stirs up a lot of questions. There's no bad questions. I've always said, I said that to Idma when we talked before. Like, there's no bad questions, but this is a serious conversation that requires some truth telling that may cause some discomfort, because the Latino community, one of the things in the conversation around in the Heights is that the Latino community has been pushing Hollywood to have better representation of the Latino community. And here it is, the Latino community has this movie that could show that representation. And once again, whiteness showed up. So we really need to continue this conversation and use today as a beginning for predominant, most of the people today I know are in Minnesota. So what is Minnesota doing? What does Minnesota want to do? How does Minnesota want to engage in this conversation? Because I know it plays out differently in all places. But who are the people that should be leading this conversation? And if a lighter skinned Latino, I can say Irma, who's here, if Irma is part of that conversation, it is important that Irma stand next to someone who is Afro-Latino, whose blackness defines their experiences differently than language and culture. Because if you only get that one side, then you're not fully getting the full picture.
Thank you so much, Yvette, for the presentation today, and also for shaking things up here in Minnesota, and again for making sure that we are centering Blackness in this conversation, and using our platform to do so. And I want to bring back Camila Mercado Micheli, who is part of our network engagement and event planning committee within LatinoLEAD. She is here to share, also moderate the Q&A section, but she also comes from lived experience, as she self-identifies as Afrodescendiente birracial and has been a champion within our community about this conversation. So thank you, Camila, for jumping in, and we'll bring Yvette back for some of the Q&A.
Thank you, Irma, LatinoLEAD, Yvette, for this space. Wow, a lot of the things you mentioned, Yvette, it really brought me back to when I was a young child. The constant assimilation is so difficult, especially talking about empowerment, positive body image, these beauty standards that, come crashing to us from Hollywood, representing what a Latinx person should look like, specifically for women, has been super challenging. It's been to the point where, I've taken my curls away. I'm Dominican, I'm Argentinian, born in Puerto Rico. I identify as a Puerto Rican, Argentinian, Dominican woman. And it's been just the constant trying to fit into this box of like, what is this Latino person supposed to look like, supposed to talk like? And I think that with the work that we're doing and bringing these conversations, and like you mentioned, Yvette, they have to continue. It can't be, Hispanic Heritage Month. Vamos a traer unos bailes de folclórico and say art, check mark. No, this is like, we need representation in movies and shows, authors, poets, scientists, political representation, because we really need to work on elevating the truthness of the diversity and beautiful cultures within the Latino population and our race as well. So I am so happy. And now we're going to enter into the Q&A. I know we have some questions from the public and some questions that we've gotten. Yeah. So one of the first questions I want to ask you, Yvette, is how can us Latinos continue to dismantle anti-Blackness and embrace it as a part of our Latino culture? I know this is a big question, but maybe some examples or what comes to your mind with this question.
It is a big question, but it's the same question when you do anti-racism work and you have white people in the space. You say you need to go back and talk to the white folks, and dismantle it there, and not leave it up for us to always be dismantling that for you. And I say that to that same answer to Latino space because it's whiteness that gets in the way of the conversation. So go back and have the conversation with those who are walking around thinking that whiteness is the center of the world, even within this diverse community, and then begin to dismantle. Why have you leaned into whiteness? Why is whiteness safer? Why has blackness been put in your mind as being unsafe? Why do you hide that you're an immigrant? Those are the same things. I think that same process of anti-racism, dismantling hate that we do in white to black perspective needs to happen in the Latino community, because it's the white perspective within the Latino community that doesn't allow blackness to come in.
Exactly. Oh my God, you couldn't have said it better. I think I remember when I was looking for jobs in Puerto Rico, they would always tell me, planchate el pelo. I had to wear my hair straight. And this is going on today, 2021. It is extremely hard to get a job if you go into an interview with your hair curly and really big and go into a workplace because of some dress code that has been obviously, this whiteness to it. So I think starting with like employers, starting with people who have the power to let us be our authentic selves and not have to hide who we are to be able to function in a society. I think just society itself, and specifically Latinx communities, we shame a lot when we want to show our true identity. Like when we're like, tú sabes, yo quiero enseñar esa parte de mí. And for some reason, it's just, there's this big like elephant in the room always. It's so hard to explain.
And the thing is that to extend on the response is that stop making this a other conversation. This is not a other. This is a Latino conversation with all of it. Don't invite me to have a conversation as if though it's important, it's outside of you. No, it's in you. It's in you. This is an in conversation that, like we don't want nobody knowing our business on the street. Then you know what? Let's stop trying to manipulate the conversation and, dismiss blackness, because we're going to keep coming at you. This is not an other conversation. This is about you. This is about your family. People come to me and was like, I don't know if I'm Afro-descendant, but I have all shades in my family. What does that mean? If you all have all shades in your family from the darkest to the lightest, that means you are a person of African descent and you may have come out a little light. I mean, you saw my father, my freshman year in college. This is how deeply rooted this stuff can be. My freshman year in college, Daddy came to pick me up. And he was walking around campus, and one of my classmates came to tell me that there was a man looking for me on campus. But she didn't say, I think it's your father. Her whole thing was a man. So I was like, oh, Daddy's here. And she goes, oh, I don't think it's your dad. And I realized, oh my God, because she thought, he was lighter and more Spanish looking. My father's side of the family is from Martinique, that he couldn't be my father because I was darker than my father. Without understanding, my mother was darker and we come in all shades. But you can tell my father he wasn't a black man. So that's how deeply rooted it is. This is an internal conversation. Stop making it another.
Totally agree. No, it is. I think, especially in my family, we are 5 siblings and we come in all shades and colors. We have el bebé que es el negrito, tenemos a mi hermana que es prieta, yo que salí hincha, me dicen. So, and to me, it's always like, it's really hard with the identity of how we've made ourselves choose one identity, because it's the one that will help you get success without being so painful because of all these obstacles that have been brought to us for some reason, so it's important.
I have Panamanian friends that in coming here realize what I didn't avoid, which would be like, I'm going to tell you I'm Panamanian, I'm going to tell you I'm Black. I didn't run away from it. But they decided that the questions were so much and it was so exhausting that they don't let people know that they're Panamanians. They live very African American, Afro Caribbean lives and only speak English because that has been the safest way to go.
And
You
and
know, so
and
that's how
Yvette,
deeply rooted it is.
and sometimes, now that you mention that, I feel like the African American community, the Black community, has accepted the Afro Latinx community in a way that's more like, I remember when I got here and they were like helping me with how do we, keep your curls healthy, like stop burning your hair down, like you have gorgeous hair. Like they made me feel like you have to be proud of this, and I felt more accepted in some sort. And then my Latina Puerto Rican girls que con las novelas were like, you look prettier with your hair straight. Like stop doing that curl thing. And the acceptance of it. So, oh my God, I can totally get what you're saying there of like how it happens when you come to the USA and it totally changes. It just shifts.
But let's not the US is so deeply rooted in systemic racism and in this lie of anti-blackness, but Latin America is not, shifted away from it. uh Latin America racism is real, but Latin America racism gets also brought into class, so the class issue sort of swims in with the race issue in Latin America. But let's not think that, you know folks are coming from their home countries with those same ideas. So when I meet, sadly, and I'm gonna be blunt, when I meet someone from Argentina who seems surprised at me because I studied in Argentina and I know how Afro-Argentinians are treated, I'm like, yeah, I know. That's how you brought that. You brought that with you. You don't even think Afro-Argentinians exist. Or when I meet folks from Chile and they'll be like, oh, pero yo nunca vi. I mean, like, there's a whole Aricas in Chile. There's a whole area of Chile that are people of African descent. So we bring our stuff with us. Um, and then when we realize that stuff that we bring with us from our countries, and then how it sits in this country, which then says black is white, black is good. I mean, black is bad, white is good. And then we try to figure out where we sit. And if we got a little bit of lightness, we'd be like, yeah, I'm leaning this way. I mean, my sister and I were laughing because she saw In the Heights before me and she loved it. And I got quiet and I'm like, oh, really? And she was like, what's wrong? Like, what did you see that I didn't see? Like, what did you get? And then she paused and she was like, there was no Yvette. Because my sister and I think we look the same, but literally we've been in spaces together. And because she's just a little lighter than me, they'll speak to her in Spanish and to me in English. So she was like, there was no Yvette.
Or maybe there is a Yvette, but it's not the lead.
No,
That's what
or it was only the background, or
exactly. That
so.
is why estamos.
But you have Gina Torres, who powerful Afro Latina actress. She has shared openly that she's gone to move to for roles in films that require a Latina and whatever, and she doesn't get it because you have folks that are not Latinos telling her how to behave as a Latina when she is of Cuban descent. So, I've learned that no matter that I speak the Spanish, that I was born in Panama, that there are folks that will not give me that card. That's why it's important for me to show up fully in my own identity and not leave it up to anyone to give it to me. I'm gonna take it because I was born to take it. I was born to walk like this.
No, I love it. We have another question. So you talk about this topic worldwide. What are the top 2 things people need to take away from this conversation, from what you shared today with us, to ensure that we are moving forward?
First and foremost, love. You gotta love yourself. You gotta love what you come from. If you love that arroz con pollo and that habichuela If you love that sazon and you love those plátanos, find out where it came from. Because when you find out where it came from, there's a little Africa up in there. So I think love of self, love of community, love of what you come from. One of the things that I learned very early on from my mentor, Clara Richards, he had shared with me once. He said, when you understand that we were dragged on those ships and dropped off everywhere. So we were pulled on those ships, our ancestors were pulled on those ships in families. And the mother was dropped off in Venezuela. The father may have been dropped off in Puerto Rico. The son was dropped off in Argentina. The other one was dropped off in Santo Domingo. So one of the things that I learned very early on is that I could be sitting in front of someone that is my family. So I enter Blackness with love. And then if you give me a reason to not sit there, then that changes. But I enter with my Blackness with love. And the second thing is, be ready to have the critical conversation. We cannot heal and we cannot move forward without the critical conversation. If Latinos had the critical conversation of embracing Blackness, then we could sit at a table with African Americans and have a better conversation and create a stronger agenda for the liberation of all of us. Because if they're not free, nor are we.
Thank you, Yvette. Very powerful message. Now we are going to be going to our fireside chat. I don't know if Irma has some instructions for that, but we are very, very honored to have you in this space and share this abundance of knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Camila.
Muchísimas gracias a ustedes dos, mujeres poderosas. Thank you so much for bringing this conversation forward. But this is, as Yvette mentioned, only the beginning. We are about to end this presentation form, and we want you all to join us immediately after for a fire chat conversation that will go into a deeper discussion post-event. And so we will be sharing the Zoom link. So we have an opportunity to see each other as well in the Zoom. So thank you again so much. And as a reminder, we are going to continue this conversation also next week on the part 2 series of our Afro-Latinidad event, Thursday, July 15 at 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Central Time, and we'll also have a fire chat discussion right after. We will include guest panelists, Edgar East, a musician from the Midwest, and Clement Wilcox, who is a research engagement specialist at the University of Minnesota, who will really talk about their Afro-Latinx Black experience in the Midwest and in Minnesota to give us more insight about that. And Yvette will be joining us again for that conversation as well. So thank you all so much for being part of this discussion, and join us right after by Zoom for our more intimate fire chat discussion. Muchísimas gracias, mi gente, y aquí estamos y nos vemos en un ratito. Gracias.